Gennady Triple G Golovkin is one of the most formidable fighters in history. The middleweight monster went on an astonishing 23-fight knockout streak. As a pro fighter myself, I've studied Golovkin more than any other boxer in history, and he's been the biggest influence in my career. And I'm going to tell you exactly what made him boxing's most destructive middleweight. Before he even turned professional, Golovkin embarked on one of the greatest amateur careers in recent years, compiling a record of 345 wins to just 5 defeats, winning multiple top-level tournaments, including an Olympic silver medal. As an amateur, he would defeat future world champions in Lucien Bute by knockout, Andy Lee and Andre Durrell. As an amateur, Golovkin adopted a more Soviet style of boxing, which requires you to be on the balls of your feet, bouncing in and out of range, and throwing your shots from a wider, loopier angle with the knuckles facing upwards. Now this is important because later on in his professional career, after teaming up with Abel Sanchez, Golovkin implemented a more Mexican aggressive style. However, he would use some of these Soviet style tricks, including the way he threw his punches from strange angles. It was the combination of both the Chavez-esque Mexican style with the solid fundamental backgrounds of the Soviet style that made him such a handful in the pros. Now what Golovkin was a master at was cutting off the ring and using his feet, and this was very similar to Chavez. Instead of following his opposition, he would instead cut off where they were going to go, trapping them into corners. In doing this, he wasted very little energy, whilst his opposition were always on the run, burning energy themselves. Eventually, his feet would trap them into corners, which is where he would do his work.
Those punches are starting to find a way through, and he's called it off!
But it wasn't just his feet that would get him into range, it was also his ramrod jab, which is one of the best in recent years. Golovkin's jab was a battering ram. Not only would it close the gap and open his opposition up, but it would smash their heads back like a right hand and cause cuts. When mixing together the aggressive front-footed nature of his footwork and that ramrod jab, his opponents would constantly be on the retreat. And with the natural heavy hands he was blessed with, they would be extremely tense, knowing that something was coming. But it wasn't just his bone-crushing power that worried opponents so much, but his elite ability to open his opposition up. Golovkin would always throw set-up shots in order to create the openings elsewhere, or using feints to disguise the punch that's going to do the serious damage. Golovkin had a few subtle tricks with his jab, and it was extremely diverse. One of the main things I noticed is when he threw the jab, he would also push the right hand forward in order to keep the momentum moving forward and blocking his opposition's jab. But he would also hook off the jab, which gave him new openings. And linking back to the footwork, what made him so dangerous was the fact that his wide stance always left him unbalanced. So when he was on the front foot, jabbing his opposition back, he was also in a position to counter punch them whilst they were on the retreat, throwing their own panicked shots. In essence, Golovkin was always unbalanced, meaning he was always dangerous and every ounce of his body was going through each punch, maximising the power. And furthermore, once he closed the gap, his footwork and balance allowed him to throw effective and destructive combination punches with little effort. He would throw punches from all sorts of weird angles that would pierce themselves either over or around the guard that his opponents just wouldn't be able to see coming. Mix that with the heavy hands, it's a perfect recipe for knockouts. And furthermore, prime Golovkin was utterly relentless. As the rounds would continue and his opponents would weaken, he would simply just throw more shots like a Terminator. But all of this is no good if you're taking shots yourself. And a common misconception, especially from prime Triple G, was the fact that he had little to no defense or head movement. But this couldn't be further from the truth. His defense was extremely subtle and done in range, allowing him to stay up close with his opposition. Golovkin was an absolute master at using his shoulders to ride shots. Smaller head movements would also make shots roll off the top of his head, or he would ride shots taking the sting out. And of course, if you were able to catch him clean, he had one of the all-time great chins. In over 390 fights as an amateur and a pro, he was never once knocked out. It was typical to see his opposition try and nullify his good work up close by either moving or tying up. However, when a retreating opponent would move, he was able to seamlessly close the gap with an old school footwork trick called shifting. Shifting basically means when you switch stances as you move your feet. This can be a great way to create new angles for your openings, and it can also maximise your power as you're shifting your weight through your feet. And when an opponent would try and tie Triple G up, he would instantly get his head underneath theirs and yank his arms out, meaning that they could never have a second's rest. And all of these things made Golovkin an absolute nightmare. Not only was he a powerful knockout machine, but he was also so technically sound and had a great ring IQ. He was hard to hit up close, and when you did hit him, he wouldn't move. He could pick you to pieces or just bludgeon you. In essence, he was a complete middleweight monster.